Hi, and welcome to my presentation on potential challenges for students with ADHD in the music classroom. This presentation will summarize my review of literature on the topic, analyzing current scientific research, and concluding with an application to my own teaching experience. Let's begin with an overview of the topic. Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, also known as ADHD, is a chronic neurodevelopmental condition that poses symptoms such as inattention, impulsivity, and hyperactivity. It is estimated that around 7 million children from ages 3 to 17 are diagnosed with ADHD in the United States alone. 5% of children and adolescents are affected by ADHD around the world. And it is also estimated that 60% of children continue being affected into adulthood. ADHD poses many problems in the classroom. Most music classrooms require focus, discipline, motor control, and rhythmic coordination, all tasks that may be challenging for students with ADHD. So it is important for music teachers to be aware of potential challenges that students face in order to provide appropriate accommodations. And this was the impetus for me studying this topic, to see and have a better understanding of what are these challenges that students with ADHD are facing, and what can I do to make my classroom more conducive for these individuals. The thesis for my paper is as follows. This literature review will explore current scientific research on the potential challenges of time processing, task switching, self-estimation, and motor impulsivity, and possible solutions for students with ADHD in the music classroom. The first challenge that I looked at was time processing. There was a study done in 2015 that investigated how music can aid symptoms of inattention in ADHD individuals. And the researchers took 36 children aged 6 to 14. 24 of those were diagnosed with ADHD. Half were non-medicated, half were medicated. And then the control group consisted of 12 neurotypical children. The children performed musical activities in 3 different categories. And those categories were time estimation tasks, time reproduction tasks, and tasks that involve temporal and motor skills. So the results of the study showed that ADHD groups performed statistically lower than the control group on temporal estimation of simple sounds and then the time estimation of music. However, there was no significance when comparing the groups in the evaluation of spontaneous time production. Another study done in 2017 explored the ability of children and adults with ADHD to synchronize movements to musical rhythm. This study was a little bit more large scale. They took 76 participants. 38 of these were ADHD diagnosed but non-medicated, and the other 38 were neurotypical children and adults that served as the controls. The experiments that they conducted required participants to tap along with various paced and unpaced rhythmic beats. And the results of this study proved that both ADHD groups struggled with rhythm synchronization as compared to the controls. So they had a hard time tapping to the beat. And so the researchers suggested long-term rhythmic training to positively affect individuals with ADHD. Continuing on with our topic of time processing, a systematic review was conducted in 2023 of the active, passive, and interactive uses of music and reducing ADHD symptoms. And so what I really looked at was their findings and then how that related to time processing. So active music therapy can reproduce hemispheric synchrony, so the communication between the left and right hemispheres of the brain, can improve self-esteem and social skills, and decrease aggressive behavior and impulsivity. Their research also showed that passive music therapy aided arithmetic skills, reading comprehension, balance, and attention. And so they decided to apply the evidence of music's ability to help in all of these ways, especially with improving timing and coordination, to create video game music. And the research really pushed for more video games to be created that are specifically intended to help students with ADHD to improve their timing and their processing of time. The next challenge that I looked at was that of task switching. And there really needs to be more research done in this area. I could really only find this one article that was, research was conducted over 20 years ago. The researchers in 2000 examined the ability of children with ADHD to switch between tasks. It was a very small study, but they took 32 participants from the ages of 6 through 12, so also very young individuals. Half had ADHD and the other half did not. And they essentially required children to perform basic tasks and then, to switch back and forth between them and see how they responded. So the results showed that the ADHD group reacted slower and with a higher rate of error than the non-ADHD group. But the medicated ADHD group actually performed about the same as the non-ADHD group, which confirmed a lot of evidence that the medication does really help decrease those negative symptoms. But more research is really required on this relationship because this is a very small study. We don't really know a lot about it, other than there was significance in the fact that the students with ADHD did have a hard time switching back and forth between tasks. The next challenge that I studied was that of self-estimation or assessment. So there were two studies that I looked at. The first was from a very current study done in 2023, where these researchers explored poor self-estimation in complex music performance in relation to foreign language tasks. And so they had noticed that students with ADHD struggled with complex music understanding, but then they wanted to look at it further in relation to linguistic skills. And so they took 25 musically trained young adults, 25 musically untrained young adults, and then 25 ADHD diagnosed young adults. They tested short-term memory capability and their music/speech discrimination, and the participants rated themselves after the performances. What they found was that compared to both control groups, the ADHD group was deficient in complex music and speech perception, and that they often overestimated their performance quality. Now, this is something that happens in other individuals, and not just ADHD individuals. And so a study done in 2007 confirmed that children with ADHD tend to be unusually favorable in self-assessments. This is called the positive illusory bias. And researchers think that it could be due to the fact that children with ADHD, they struggle with a lot of things, so they experience a lot of failure. And that could be a catalyst to give themselves a higher rating in their assessments, because that's going to push them to do that challenge again if they feel good about it. If they're constantly failing, they're not going to want to do a task again. And so even if it's a false reality, there's a tendency for ADHD students to just go ahead and give themselves that optimism. But this also exists among non-ADHD children as well, depending on your circumstances, your childhood development, and there's a lot of reasons for this. And so more research needs to be done to confirm whether PIB is directly tied to ADHD, or if there are other things. It just happens to overlap with ADHD students, that they also have other factors and combining with ADHD. So the last challenge that I looked at was motor impulsivity. And there was a study done in 2000 that studied inhibitory control in children with ADHD. There were 120 total participants. Half had ADHD, half did not. And they used a traditional stop signal task to measure their control. So a stop signal task is just a scenario where a child has to respond quickly to a go symbol And then when presented with a different auditory signal, they have to stop that typical response and see if they can actually adjust. Well, the study showed that the ADHD group had a significantly longer stop signal times than the control group. Another study in 2006 by Rickson looked at the effects of music therapy on reducing motor impulsivity. And this was a very small study, and it was only 13 boys aged 11 through 16, but they were enrolled in a residential school. So it took place over actually a long period of time. The boys were treated with instructional and improvisational models of music therapy. However, there was no statistical significance between the impact of the two models on the boys' ADHD. There was some small signs that maybe the instructional model had an impact, and it was certainly not negative, but there just wasn't enough statistical evidence to say that it had a big impact. Finally, the last study that I looked at on motor impulsivity was from Wild and Welch in 2022. They conducted a case study on 2 boys with ADHD, differing ages, medical profiles, and musical backgrounds. The results were that both students could successfully participate in music and grow musically. So these researchers, this is a very small case study. It's only 2 individuals, so it's hard to say if you can really apply this to the broader population. But what they were trying to point out was, hey, it's not impossible for ADHD students to participate and really succeed in the music classroom. It really depends. Their symptoms and the severity of them depend on the context, depend on the type of classroom you're in. And so if they're in a really, really good situation, they can absolutely grow musically. However, I don't know, to what extent this is reliable, just because it was such a small study. So how do I apply this research to my teaching experience? Well, I would say the first thing would be awareness of the challenges that students with ADHD face in the classroom has given me a fuller understanding and compassion for the students I teach, which will not only fuel my desire to accommodate their needs, but also to create awareness of ADHD at my school, in the classroom. And proper education of ADHD symptoms will help to reduce stigma and cultivate kindness towards students with ADHD in both educational and non-educational contexts. Frequently, students with ADHD are not taken seriously and punished for, bad behavior with no understanding of symptoms. However, when teachers realize that these students may face difficulties such as impulse control, timing issues, inattention, restlessness, and poor self-assessment, in addition to all of the typical behavioral issues, they are not so quick to cast judgment. Instead, we are going to be more inclined to seek solutions for these problems. And so this research has also prompted me to pursue further collaboration with school professionals, such as the intervention specialists at my school and other teachers who have had more experience than I have and can give great insight. Lastly, this research has rekindled a desire to be strategic in my lesson plan. So thinking through not just how am I going to have a good rehearsal for my students today, but how can it be a good rehearsal for the ADHD specific students, the students that are struggling with ADHD, and how can I, modify and make it work for everyone. So an example would be, someone who is struggling with self-reflection. Okay, I need to not just give them a self-reflection, a post-concert reflection, and expect them to rate themselves accurately. I need to actually guide them through the process and model to them what that looks like. So all in all, this research has given me better understanding of the challenges faced by students with ADHD, prompted me to pursue further collaboration, and rekindle that desire to be strategic in my lesson plan. Finally, please see the attached references that I used in my review of literature. And I hope you have enjoyed this presentation. This concludes my research on the potential challenges for ADHD students in the music classroom.